my name is Travis Dickinson, and you're watching Atheist Edge, and you should watch Atheist Edge, no matter if you're Southern Baptist or a Christian or an atheist.
Hola amigos, soy Shirley Rivera, soy de Puerto Rico, vivo actualmente en Estados Unidos y soy presidenta de los Ateos de Puerto Rico y de la Alianza Internacional de Ateos para Latinoamérica.
Countries with a Muslim majority impose Sharia, a government enforcement of religious laws and customs found in the Quran and the Hadith. The primary goal of Islam is to eventually replace every government on earth with Sharia. This mandatory theocratic legal plan constitutes a totalitarian means of governing society. Laws under Sharia include enforcement of morality, etiquette, and manners, when and how to worship. Husbands may beat their wives for disobedience.
Ooh.
Legal contracts, death penalty for homosexuals, adulterers, or those that leave the faith, apostates. Punishments for exercising free speech, including a death sentence for criticizing Islam, Muhammad, Sharia, or the Quran. Gambling, sex out of wedlock, and drinking alcohol is punishable by whipping, and those convicted of theft will have a hand cut off.
Bueno, aquí no hay nada diferente a lo que es el cristianismo, definitivamente. O sea, lo que es esta cultura de castigo y esta cultura de oprimir y de castigar y de desaparecer y cancelar a lo que no es igual, o a lo que no nos apoya, a lo que no sigue las masas. O sea, la persona que cree en esto, que siga esto, realmente está mal de la cabeza. Porque aquí no hay nada diferente a lo que le criticábamos a los NAZIS. No hay nada diferente. Y una de las cosas más importantes que podemos ver aquí es cómo se perpetúa la cultura de castigo, aunque las personas ya no sean tan religiosas, o no sean islámicas, o no sean cristianoides, pues realmente tú te puedes dar cuenta que esta idea del castigo por ser esto, el castigo por ser lo otro, por hacer esto, por opinar, por cancelarte por tener esta idea, esta ideología, realmente no es diferente a este pensamiento abrahámico, de las religiones abrahámicas, que todas comparten y todas se entrelazan a lo que es el castigo y el odio, la persecución por simplemente personas diferentes. Y una de las cosas que yo digo que por eso debemos de abolir la religión, que no se trata de islamofobia y no se trata de cristianofobia, se trata de que lo que hace daño y lo que perpetúa la opresión y lo que perpetúa el engaño y el abuso y las guerras, la masacre y el odio, hay que acabarlo, porque realmente aquí podemos concluir que todas estas personas que persiguen esto realmente no están tienen conocimiento de esto. Entonces no serían tan cristianos o tan musulmanes, porque si no saben de sus propias escrituras, entonces, ¿qué son? O si realmente sí tienen conocimiento y con todo el conocimiento lo siguen, pues entonces algo está mal en su mente. Que cualquiera de ambas, algo está mal.
A 90-year-old woman gave birth in Genesis 17:17. That's fun. Once upon a time, God wanted to send one of his offspring to earth to save humanity. This is Abraham 3:27. Jesus, God's firstborn son, offered to go to earth and commit suicide to take away humankind's sin. In Moses 4:2. Lucifer, Jesus' brother, also offered to go to earth. He wanted to force humans to obey his father, but his plan involved removing mankind's free will. After God had heard from both of his sons, he chose Jesus. This pissed Lucifer off, so he and a third of his brothers and sisters started a war against Jesus. God banished Lucifer and his crew from heaven and prevented them from ever getting mortal bodies. Gospel Principles, 1997.
Iron axe heads can float. Nick Peters says, there is something in there about an iron axe head floating. Again, this is called a miracle. I really don't understand this technique of atheists. Look, your account contains miracles. Yeah, it does. That's only ipso facto stupid if it's shown there is no God, which is really what this question is under dispute. This makes as much sense as me going to atheists and saying, look, your account requires naturalistic evolution. Which apologists actually do that a lot. Yeah, that actually is one of the... of course, they don't do that with atheists in the audience. They're doing that with the assumption that they're talking to Christians and they're going to scare the Christians away from whatever the implications are by pointing out that this requires naturalism. Oh, scary naturalism. And evolution. My daddy ain't no monkey. So it's just a funny thing for him to say, because I don't know if Nick has actually done that. I don't know him well enough to know. Well, actually, I really haven't paid any attention to his apologetics at all, really. But that is something that apologists do, is point out that that a lot of the criticisms to their points of view require naturalistic evolution, and that's a problem. Now, as for this iron axe head in 2 Kings, so this is... Nick's probably right. This is a miracle. It's a weird miracle, though. It's a weird one. So this is it takes place in 2 Kings during the sequence of events where it's sort of focused on Elisha and all the things that he's doing, and Elisha is a miracle worker. He's a prophet. He's basically Elijah 2.0. In fact, it probably is just two separate story accounts, one referring to Elijah and one referring to Elisha, and they just decided to make them all consistent within the narrative, but that's neither here nor there. Within the story, it is the case that Elisha is performing all sorts of miracles in very much the same style that Jesus does. In fact, most of the miracles that Elisha does, Jesus replicates later. So never found a good a story that wasn't also good for recycling later in the Bible. Most of the good ones are recycled because it makes sense. So it's a miracle. It's a weird one. You've got a guy who's chopping down a tree and the axe head flies off and goes into the river, and then Elisha goes down and throws a stick in the water and the axe head floats up to the surface. It's a weird miracle. Elisha can do, in the story, he can do so much more cool things. He can cure leprosy. He can make miraculous food appear. He can raise people from the dead. Why does he make an axe head float? I don't know. There probably was some point to this. Maybe even some sort of a theological point. But it seems relatively opaque in the text at this point, so I don't know. It's a weird one, but I'll go ahead and give it to Nick. It is a miracle, but at the same time, I'll give it to Jim. Yeah, it might be a miracle, but man, it's a weird one, and it's probably one that doesn't get taught very much. So, make of that what you will.
The Jewish Messiah was supposed to be a great military leader and liberator of oppression. Prophecy indicates the Messiah was to oversee the rebuilding of Jerusalem, including the Third Temple, bring all the Jews back to Israel, influence everyone on earth to serve Yahweh, bring about world peace, and end all wars. None of this happened. Jesus' disciples were shocked by Jesus' unexpected demise and had to work quickly to reinvent him.
Bueno, claramente aquí podemos ver que esto no es nada diferente que se haya visto en la historia. De hecho, cuando lo escucho, lo que pienso es de quién estamos hablando, de los líderes de la Revolución Cubana, o estamos hablando de los líderes de la Revolución de Inglaterra. No, realmente aquí lo que vemos es cómo se perpetúa este nacionalismo que va de la mano con la religión. Y de hecho, todo eso se modela y se inventa y se reinventa a su conveniencia, porque esta historia de que fue y vino con sus militares, los fue y los buscó, luego la historia se cambia a su conveniencia y la ponen aquí, allá, que realmente no hay tan siquiera datos históricos que te puedan confirmar que estas batallas sucedieron. Pero si tú te das cuenta, pues mira, Jesús era un revolucionario, Jesús era un defensor de las personas, el Mesías. O sea, ¿por qué el Mesías? El Mesías era un líder, un activista, que sería el equivalente de lo que hoy en día las personas en su mayoría cristianas odian. Pero entonces, si escuchamos esta historia, ¿de qué estamos hablando? Esto suena como si estuviéramos hablando de un revolucionario. No sé.
There's only one reason to believe in something, because you know it to be true. These are reasons not to believe in something. The belief gives you comfort, because everyone around you believes it. Believing it gives you hope. Fear of losing your job, friends, or social standing. Fear of death or the unknown, because of peer pressure or to fit in, or for a feeling of belonging or a sense of community. Jesus' disciples were Muslims. The disciples said, "We are helpers of Allah. We have faith in Allah."
There's a great quote from Stephen King. Quote, "When his life was ruined, his family killed, his farm destroyed, Job knelt down on the ground and yelled up to the heavens, 'Why, God, why me?' And the thundering voice of God answered, 'There's just something about you that pisses me off.'"
Joseph Smith dictated the Book of Mormon using ancient inscriptions on gold plates. He was not given access to these plates, however, until he married Emma Hale and completed a ritual. As part of the ritual, Smith and Hale had to put on black robes, take a black horse-drawn carriage to a sacred hill at midnight, and then practice black magic.
Esto suena más que a un babalao que suena a una santería. Esto suena como que magia negra, magia blanca. Eso nada más me recuerda a las abuelas mías en Cataño, Puerto Rico, haciendo babalao y adorando y alabando a su curandero y sus rituales, que de hecho esto no se aleja nada de la realidad. Esta gente, lo más triste es que critican a las personas que hacen paganismo, pero esto no se aleja del paganismo. Esto de magia blanca, magia negra, esto no es nada más que paganismo. Y eso te recalca de que esta gente reinventó dentro del cristianismo, reinventó su propia religión y su propia secta, agarrando y robándose de diferentes religiones. Esto de magia blanca y magia negra, ¿qué es esto? ¿Son paleros? ¿Son santeros? ¿Son yorubas? ¿Son babalaos? ¿Qué realmente qué son? Y esto de verdad que es ridículo. Realmente a veces uno no encuentra ni qué comentar, porque es como que una religión de buffet. Ellos agarraron lo que convenía. Usted sabe que cuando usted es un buffet, usted agarra el arroz, usted agarra esto, usted agarra la carne, usted agarra para aquí. Esto es simplemente una secta de buffet. Agarraron todo lo que les convenía de todas, la juntaron, la pusieron a su conveniencia y crearon su religión de los mormones.
In the following countries, it is illegal just to be an atheist: Afghanistan, Iran, Malaysia, Maldives, Mauritania, Nigeria, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, the Sudan, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen.
Non-believers are deaf, dumb, and blind, according to the Quran 2:171.
There is no free will in heaven. There is no sin in heaven, so our inability to commit sins effectively strips us of our free will. Our ability to mourn for our friends and family members who are burning in hell will be taken away, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. All right. I call this one the problem of heaven. it's a counterpart to the problem of hell, which itself is a subset of the problem of evil. So for the problem of hell, you've got a situation where you're punishing people with infinite torture for a finite crime. And that tends to bother most people's sense of justice, which is why theological concepts like universalism and annihilationism have become popular recently. But with the problem of heaven, you have a situation where you're taking away people's ability to commit any crime at all. And that tends to bother people too, because if you can't make any mistake at all, if you can't screw up, what kind of life is that? It's kind of like being turned into a robot, right? It's impossible for you to do anything wrong. You're being controlled and manipulated and restricted. It's like being programmed like a robot. And so that's very distasteful. And so the idea that free will is taken away from you in heaven, although it makes theological sense, absolutely makes theological sense, because what's the point of heaven if when people go to heaven, they could commit a sin and have to go to hell, right? So then there's no actual benefit to heaven. It's not a reward, because you might as well just end up in hell, right? So heaven is just sort of like a second chance to screw up. So that kind of heaven doesn't make any sense. So to be theologically consistent, to justify its existence at all, quite frankly, hell has to be a place where your free will is stripped away. But then it doesn't really make moral sense anymore to go to heaven, because then the essence of who you are, right? If what we are moral agents, right? Part of what makes us distinctive as creatures is the fact that we have moral agency and we can choose this thing versus that. That matters to who we are as human beings. If that is taken away from us and we become automatons, that is morally terrifying. At least to me. And if people want to become robots, maybe that says something about them. I don't know. Now, so that's the problem. So you've got this theological imperative that heaven has to be a place where free will is taken away from you. But if you take free will away from people in heaven, then they become robots, and that's very distasteful. And so very often you've got these responses that come up from Christian apologists like Nick, although he didn't actually comment here. But very often apologists will say, well, God doesn't actually take away people's free will in heaven. He just creates a situation, or he's created this particular environment where nobody actually wants to sin. So it's not like they'd have their free will taken away. They could sin. It's just the environment is constructed in such a way that nobody actually wants to sin. And that seems like a distinction without much of a difference, quite frankly. And let's say that is true. Let's say that is actually the case. Number one, is there any actual meaningful difference morally between that and taking away somebody's free will? It seems like in practice, it's kind of the same thing. You've become a robot, but you're being reprogrammed by the environment, which I think would also be just as distasteful. Number two, and this is the big one, if God was able to create heaven as an environment where nobody wanted to sin and they had their free will, then why couldn't he have done that in the Garden of Eden? Right? God could do it in heaven, why not in the Garden of Eden? Why was that not the case? Why wasn't it the case that Adam and Eve it would never have occurred to them to sin or to eat of the fruit or whatever? It just, or it would have offended them, the idea of sinning. If they knew what sin was and they said, I don't ever want to do that, and the serpent tempted them and they're like, get out of here. We're not going to do that. Wouldn't that have been better in this whole scheme? But you can't do that, because if there's no original sin in the Garden of Eden in the Christian narrative, then there's no need for Jesus. So you've got to have Jesus, right? Got to have Jesus, or you got to have the original sin. But if you have the original sin that way, then heaven doesn't make any sense. Well, if heaven doesn't make any sense, what is Jesus saving us from and sending us to? That doesn't make any sense either. So the whole thing just kind of falls apart. It is ridiculous, and that's the problem of heaven.